Good evening, everybody. Um, Thanks for joining us tonight. And I want to just say a few words before we introduce our speakers for the discussion tonight, which I think is kind of obvious, but this has been quite the week with the obvious situation with Afghanistan, something which the LaRouche organization has been saying quite a bit, has had quite a bit to say in the last period, the last recent weeks, and has certainly been quite an explosive and headline catching situation. And I think it's appropriate to say that all the leading experts and academics and political figures from both sides have been royally slapped in the face, which is not a bad thing actually, but it certainly did happen, because what we've seen in Afghanistan is nothing less than the complete abject failure of not even just Western policy, but geopolitical incompetence and criminality globally for several decades. Remember, the beginning of the fight in Afghanistan goes back to over 40 years ago with the Soviets in the 80s, late 70s and 80s. So what are we dealing with? I want to just mention it because I think it poses an interesting question for the discussion tonight. When Mrs. LaRouche was discussing this question yesterday, she was very sharp because, what are people saying? There, a lot of political officials are saying, well, we didn't see this coming, or we didn't expect the Taliban would be taking over so quickly, or we thought that we did a better job. A lot of people thought that we did a better job in this disaster of 20 years of war in Afghanistan. What's the other one? Oh, we should have drawn out sooner. We should have just left sooner because there's nothing you can do at all. This kind of thing. Or what was said by the one of the more truthful things said was by the German president, who said this is a shame on the West, on the NATO countries in the West, and that everybody is to blame, which is more true. But what Helga LaRouche said is they're all full of crap, because there was one person and one person only in the West who was proposing the required solutions, which was Lyndon LaRouche, the LaRouche movement, his wife Helga LaRouche, which was the absolute uncompromising necessity to go with global development, to go with real development in the region of all of Southwest Asia, to provide for economic activity, to flow, to provide for something other than the terror of the drug trade, which many Afghan citizens turn to out of necessity, out of economic necessity, and without going at the question of the World Land Bridge and what is now the Belt and Road proposed by China. There was no other outcome. This was obvious, one could say. So we have now a situation where the house of cards has fallen. Even though it's on the other side of the world, the slap to the face is a very real one, because it is very much the creation, the policy creation of our leadership on both parties, on both sides of the aisle in the United States and more generally. So we have an interesting situation, which the one last thing that I'll say before I turn it over to Denise and Carl is that, we actually have a similar situation to Afghanistan in the United States. If you ask the question, why didn't more Afghani citizens and soldiers and whoever else fight the Taliban? And I think the obvious question is, there is no nation, there is no idea of a nation. There's actually no conception. It's a hot air balloon, is one way to put it. It's an avatar, which is really what we have in the United States. We have a task similarly in the United States, which is, how do we recreate our nation? How do we actually reinvigorate and reinstill in our citizens not only trust in our government and trust in our neighbor, but a passion to rebuild our nation and to conquer the unknown, to explore the solar system and the universe, to do the kinds of things that would actually regenerate a civilization, which is why, of course, we're saying, forget make America great again. We have to first make America good again. It's the first step. So, which leads us to the question of Dante, and I think I'll turn it over at this point, but the question of a language culture, which Lyndon LaRouche very uniquely posed, in addition to this question of economic development and the world land bridge and the regional economic activity, which is so crucial. But the question of a language culture, if you don't have that, then there is no amount of military might, there is no amount of money, there's no amount of political power or bribery or media influence or, weaseling to rub elbows and make friends and influence people. There is none of that which will stand the test of actually creating a nation that will stand the test of time and will stand up for itself. And so tonight we're going to have a very fun discussion for everybody on a very unique individual, Dante Alighieri, who actually did set in motion what did become the question of the Italian Renaissance, and I think what we should take a page from today. So let's I'll turn it over to you, Denise, and we'll go from there.
I wanted to start out this evening with a quote from Mr. Lyndon LaRouche from his The Science of the Human Mind, which was published back in 1983. I'm taking about three sentences. He says, "The science of the mind was broadly defined by Plato and the opposing view given by Aristotle during the 4th century BC. Leading aspects of this were freshly treated by St. Augustine. The science of mental development was famously elaborated in depth by Dante Alighieri in his Commedia. Rigor was added to this by Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa." And then he says, oh, I'm sorry, I lost the, he says that the purpose of his work, The Science of the Human Mind, is to aid the reader to locate within himself or herself those kinds of developable potentialities so that the author's inevitable death will not render the mastery of this method once again a lost art. So, taking a cue from Lynn, tonight we're going to be talking about Dante Alighieri, who was born in 1265 in Florence, Italy. It is his 700th anniversary of his death in 1321. Dante was, I consider, the grandfather of the Renaissance, with the father being Nicholas of Cusa, about 100 odd years later. I was inspired to read Dante actually when I was about 14. I didn't get too far on my own, but I really loved reading this. And I proposed as a motto for my school, abandon all hope, ye who enter here, which didn't go over too good, but, you know, I think a lot of people got a kick out of it. That's what I thought of school. Dante was born in May of 1265. He is one of the greatest geniuses who have ever lived. Dante created the Italian language. Most people in Italy, or it wasn't even Italy, it was the principalities and areas. They weren't really a nation, so there was no Italy at that time. Could not read and write. This was true mostly for most of Europe. People could not read, they could not write. The only thing that was accessible by reading was in Latin, and of course they couldn't read Latin. So what Dante did is he created the Italian language. What he did is he took several hundred dialects that existed in Italy, and he created out of this a rich Italian language, which you'll hear some from Tim in a little while. Italy did not become Italy until actually 1861. A good friend of mine who had the opportunity of visiting Italy some years back recounted her visit by telling me that she remembers being in a cab and hearing a cab driver recite portions of the Commedia. The Italian language is so musical and beautiful that it lends itself to the oral tradition of recitation. Let's see. So you probably, I don't know if people know this or not, but there was a big attack against Dante and of all dead white European males going back to the 1992 period. These were the agents of Malthusianism who called for the end of the classics in schools and universities. And their Italian counterparts were calling for getting rid of Dante in the schools. Basically, they were accusing the dead white European males of being racist simply because they were white. So there has been a destruction of learning, and this is what we're organizing to bring back to the population, is to bring back Dante. So the question is, what is it that drives the intensely political poetry of Dante and of all great poets who have lived throughout history? And the answer lies in the concept of passion as the driving force in creative activity. Most people think that passion means something other than the prime emotion which governs the universe. The Dark Ages in which Dante composed his work is similar to that which we're going through now. The language we use has been bastardized to the point that passion is the love of some movie star or a banal song, or the love of some sport, or geniuses is being treated similarly. Geniuses are thought of as Stephen Jobs, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and for the more depraved Lady Gaga. Passion, properly defined, is the search for the good, the beautiful, which very few people, unfortunately, today know anything about, universal truth, and agape, which is the love for all mankind. And the creator, which is Dante, the love of all mankind comes through in Dante's work. In English, there is only one word for love. It's called love. That's all you get. That's why why there is such fragmentation in the English language. There's no other word to describe love. The Greeks actually taught that there were three ideas of love, which is the eros, erotic, philia, the love of family or the love that parents have for the children, as in philosophy, the love of language, or in Philadelphia, love of brotherhood. So that's philia, the second kind. And finally, agape, which is also known as caritas, also known as charity in English, is translated from St. Paul's Corinthians. Now, the Florence that Dante was forced to leave is the same Florence which produced one of mankind's greatest geniuses, Leonardo da Vinci, born in 1452 in the very same city of Florence, which fuse is lit by the great genius of the modern world, Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa. The resultant explosion is readily seen in the incredible beauty of art and science of Leonardo, Raphael, Brunelleschi, Erasmus, St. Thomas More, and others. Carl Osgood is with us tonight. He's going to give you a very good picture of the times that Dante lived in. Now, today we are in a great crisis. As Stuart started out in the briefing tonight, in Afghanistan, where we spent 21 years, which is the longest war we have ever been in, and a cost of trillions of dollars. When we left Afghanistan, the only thing that was created bigger was the opium trade. The opium trade grew in that period, in that 21-year period. And we must now fight for a renaissance out of this dark age, which must begin by uniting China, Russia, India, Pakistan, Italy, to create what Lynn and Helga LaRouche called the World Land Bridge, meaning the rapid development of a world health system, along with the investment into modern infrastructure, linking each nation and finally the continents, and expelling the British and American geopoliticians. Only in this way can we ensure a future where a child is born in Africa or Haiti today will become the next Dante, Mozart, or LaRouche tomorrow. The world needs more people. Today, in Africa and Haiti, children die in infancy, and in many countries do not live past the age of 5. So you can see the tremendous, horrific waste of potential going on by the oligarchs, which is why we fight. So with that said, and the fact that the world needs more people, let me begin with the business of talking about Dante. Now, what I want to begin with is totally counterintuitive. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to the end of Inferno, and then we can go back to the beginning. So I want the end of Inferno. Please put that up for me. The Dore there. I don't know if you can blow that up at all. Can you? I don't know how people can see that. But there is, yeah, that's better. Now you see, I think in the middle there, Satan. And what he's doing is, you can see there's ice all over the place. which is also counterintuitive because people believe that hell is full of fire. Dante says no, that the depths of hell are ice because they are the furthest removed from the love of God. So Satan is chomping on Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. And anyway, I wanted to start at the end because a good friend of ours and of mine, Fred Wills, who passed away, I can't remember the year exactly, I think it was 94, 95. But Fred Wills was a genius in his own right. What he did is he not only called for a debt moratorium for the underdeveloped sector, but he also taught us, he tutored us in Shakespeare. And Fred said that you should always know the plot of a great play because the real business is figuring out who the enemy is. Because the real business is having an understanding, a critical understanding of tragedy and which forces and which kind of personalities come up in destroying mankind in tragedy. So in that spirit, I wanted you to go to the end of the Inferno first. Now, what I would like to do is take you to, let's see, I think the schema of Dante, of the Inferno, if I can have that. That's Carl's there. Okay, the circles of hell. I don't know if you can read this at all, but it starts out up here in the vestibule of hell. In the vestibule of hell are located the men and women and angels who could not decide to be on God's side or Satan's side. They had a hard time choosing. So they get to go to the vestibule of hell. In other words, they're not even in hell because they don't deserve even to be there. So what happens is they're running around screaming and being attacked by hornets and wasps. And this is the whole schema of hell, is that you have this tremendous screaming and murky air. That is the idea of the circles of the Inferno. Sometimes you can find this in a book that you're reading, or you can do what I do, and you can just get this out of the internet. Let's see. I wanted to also take the picture of Dante, the one I had, not the one with him with the laurel wreath, the picture of Botticelli. Yes, that's the Botticelli Dante. So you have an idea of what Dante looked like. And I also wanted to get the picture of, I think I have it, of Dante and Virgil at the wall of hell. No, maybe we didn't get that one, the wall of hell. It might have been too dark to make out.
That might have been that other one that didn't quite
It's probably the
right,
one,
yeah.
yeah. These are taken from the Doré Prince, which is a whole class in and of itself altogether, which I won't try to go into tonight. But I urge people to read the Inferno. You don't need a lot of information from me to do it. It's extremely engaging and exciting to read. Once you start, you'll get hooked. I can guarantee that. So I would urge everyone to read the Inferno. And just to leave you with an initial idea before I stop and let Carl talk, I just wanted you to know that Dante's guide in hell is Virgil, the poet of the Aeneid. And the first time that Dante he's moving to enter hell with Virgil, and he tells Virgil how absolutely terrified he is to go into hell. And Virgil, what he does is he corrects and organizes Dante by saying, look, don't be a coward. This is important. This is something you have to do. So Dante does what Virgil asks, and he does go into the Inferno. Let's see. Okay, what I'd like to do now is actually to ask Tim if he could please recite the first lines of Canto 3, which end with "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here," in Italian.
Okay. I have very strange lighting on my desk, so it looks like I am entering hell. So I have to ask your forbearance on that.
Just
so
adds to the drama.
Yeah, exactly. No, I arranged it just for this moment. Per me si va nella città dolente. Per me si va nell'eterno da perduta gente. Giustizia mosse il mio alto fattore, fecemi la divina potestate, la somma sapienza, il primo amore. Dinanzi a me non fuor create, se non eterne, dinanzi a me non fuor cose create, se non eterne, e io eterno duro. Lasciate ogni speranza voi che entrate. Do you want me to discuss the translation?
Yes, a translation, please.
Okay, sure. This is a, this will give you, it's almost verbatim. It's not actually done in a poetic form, but it'll give you, through me, the way into the woeful city, città dolente. Through me, the way to eternal pain. Eterno dolore. Through me, the way among the lost people. Divine power made me, and supreme wisdom and primal love, which is a phrasing of the Trinity in terms of divine power, supreme wisdom, and primal love. Before me, nothing was created but eternal things, which means that hell was not built into God's plan, but was a consequence of the fall of Satan, of the treachery, of the betrayal. And I endure eternally. Io eterna duro. Abandon every hope, or abandon all hope, ye who enter here.
Carl, if you just, I'll just take 1 minute because there's something important that I forgot to tell people, which is that in hell, at the very end of hell, the last three circles of hell in the ninth ninth circle of hell are the traitors, are people who are guilty of treason. That's also counterintuitive because you might think that maybe murderers or other sorts of sinners would be in the pit of hell. But what Dante does is he puts Judas there, and Judas is a very interesting figure because he commits a treachery against Christ, but as St. Peter did by denying Christ, he does not ask for forgiveness. He does not break down and beg God to forgive him. If he had done that, I don't see why he would not have been saved. But he doesn't. So his worst sin, and I think this is, true for a lot of people, is despair. That the sin that will nail the head to the coffin is the idea that there's nothing you can do. It's total despair. And that's why Judas sits there. So I just wanted to bring that out. And Carl, I'm sorry, we're going to you.
Okay. All right. So what I want to do is situate Dante into the historical processes that were going on in Europe up through his time. Now, I'm not going to make you all experts in the history of the Middle Ages in 40 minutes. I'm not even an expert on that. But I just want to touch on a few important inflection points in the historical process. But what I want to start with, let me get set up here. What I want to start with is something that some of you may think has nothing to do with poetry. Where am I here? There, that's what I want. Share. Okay, so what you see here is a chart of population growth of Europe beginning in the way back in the Paleolithic times up to 1975. This was a chart that Lyndon LaRouche used often in his presentations and that we published many times to underscore what makes mankind unique and different from the beasts, which is how mankind can change his environment in order to promote his own population growth. And what going to do here, I want to focus on a particular part of this graph. As you see I got to make it, there we go. Okay, so here is I focused on a particular part from 400 BC, which is the early period of the Roman Empire. And I want to go and where you see a slight rise in the population of Europe up to about 200 AD. And then it collapses from 200 to about 600 AD. This is the Dark Ages. And then you'll see around this period between 600 and 800, it starts to rise slowly again. And it keeps rising till about the year 1300. And then it crashes again. In the middle of this is the Black Death, the bubonic plague that wiped out about a third of the population of Europe. And then it rises again and it just rises steadily after that. I mean, there are interruptions, but the general directionality is upwards. So from about this period between 1400 and 1500 is the Italian Renaissance. That's the period of the greatest scientific breakthroughs of all history up to that time, and the beginning of modern science. Now, Dante is in this period right here, rise, then crash. And so we'll move on. And that gives you a sense of the physical process that was going on at the time. And then the first inflection point I want to talk about a little bit is the Roman Empire. This was a long period of looting of the whole Mediterranean region, very long, about 1,000 years, from 200 BC until the Dark Ages. Now, this first inflection point I want to talk about is about 300 AD. So this person you're seeing here, this is Diocletian, who was Roman emperor just prior to the year 300. He is famous for establishing the Diocletian Code, which basically required that if you were born into a farming family, you were then required to work the same piece of land that your father did using the same methods. This is the birth of serfdom in Europe. And then the next emperor so this is the Roman Empire at the time of Diocletian. This is Italy here, and then this is the Balkans, Greece. Now, the other thing that Diocletian is famous for is for splitting the empire into an eastern and western half. Diocletian himself didn't actually rule from Rome. He ruled from Dalmatia, somewhere about where Albania is today, in this area. So the Western Empire collapsed fairly quickly, about 200 years later, but the Eastern Empire continued, becoming known as the Byzantine Empire because it was centered in Greece and Constantinople over here. So that was what things looked like at the time of Diocletian. Now, this is the next emperor I want to talk about. This is Constantine. Now, what Constantine is famous for is being the so-called first Christian emperor, of legalizing Christianity. Diocletian was the last emperor to try to kill off the Christians by feeding them to the lions and this stuff. It didn't work, obviously. So Constantine, my view is from the studies that I had done, is that Diocletian's real aim was not to himself become a real Christian, but to bring in corruption into the Christian church, corruptions that Dante was still dealing with 1,000 years later. All right, so the next person I want to talk about is, I'm going to turn this off for a minute. Oh. And then we'll get back to that in a second. The next person so 200 years after Diocletian and Constantine, there was the emperor in Rome was no longer even Roman. There was a guy called Theodoric, who was Visigoth. I think he was from the east. Remember that Rome was sacked in 410 AD. That's the time that's what inspired St. Augustine to write the City of God. And then around 500, you have an emperor named Theodoric. Now, Theodoric had a chancellor by the name of Boethius. Now, Boethius is very famous in the Middle Ages in Europe. He was the counsel to Theodoric. He was a renowned scholar, particularly of the Greeks, both sides of the Greeks, Aristotle and Plato. Everybody who was literate in Latin read Boethius in the scholastic Europe. So Boethius at a certain point in his service to Theodoric was accused of some treason that we don't know what it was anymore. It's no longer recorded, but he was imprisoned. And then he writes a very popular work called the Constellation of Philosophy. And in this is a sort of dialogue in Latin, originally in Latin. It was later translated into other languages. He was executed for this unknown treason. He always maintained that he was not guilty of the charges against him. But while he was in prison, he wrote the Constellation of Philosophy. This is in 5 books. In the first book, he's lamenting his situation. He says, I did all these good things. I have all this learning. I'm innocent of these charges, and yet here I am about to be killed. And if you study Inferno, I want you to you should keep in mind Boethius, because there's a figure in the Inferno who is a contrast to Boethius in terms of his situation, and that is the chancellor to the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II. I can't recall his name at the moment, but he was also accused of treason against his sovereign, and he was executed. But in the well, actually, he wasn't executed because he committed suicide before he could be executed. He was in such despair, so Boethius is in contrast because he's instead of giving into the despair, he writes a book, and in this book, it's a dialogue with a lady called Philosophy. And he says, and basically, so Boethius is lamenting his fate, and he's visited by this lady Philosophy, who leads him out of his misery towards his consolation, because essentially she argues that the judgment passed by others on him is not the true judgment of the value of his life. The first thing that she does is she completely rips apart the idea of good fortune. That if you bet on fortune, this is a bad idea because fortune is so fickle and undependable. It can't be depended on, except when you have bad fortune, then you know it's no good.
Carl,
Yeah?
Carl, we're running out of time.
Oh,
Yeah, I think it's probably my fault, but we are running out of time. If you could just quickly go to the Guelphs and the Ghibellines
okay.
in Dante area.
All right. Well, okay. Because then I'll just jump ahead. I have to jump ahead to the Holy Roman Empire because of Frederick II, because that's where the things occur. But basically, what's going on, is that there's basically a battle going on between the popes and the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, and the popes. So the Frederick II represents temporal government that he's trying to establish in Europe. The popes are the religious government, so to speak, and Dante was very much came around to the idea that mixing religion and politics is a bad idea. And but what the relationship is really is the relationship between the Pope and the Florentine banking houses, because I'm trying to find it in my notes here. Dante attacks the Florentine banking houses by name because basically the Pope is collecting taxes mainly from France. The Florentine banking houses are more than happy to give him loans on the basis of the future revenues from that taxing, and get the Pope deeply in debt. They also get everybody else deeply in debt, and there's a number of battles between the forces of the papacy and the forces of the empire, of the Holy Roman Empire. And ultimately what happens is that the Florentine banking houses end up in total control of Florence by about 1270 or so. And so there's absolutely no restraint on their rapacious looting. So this is the time that Dante becomes active, and he comes to understand what this process is. This is noted by the fact that in the Inferno, he actually condemns 3 of the Florentine banking houses by name in the Inferno, and he as usurers, which is what they were. So the Ghibellines are the party of the empire. The Guelphs are the party of the papacy, and really the Florentine banking houses. So initially, Dante is basically born and raised up. His political life is raised up as a Guelph. But even the Guelph party splits, and it splits into 2 factions called the Blacks and the Whites. But because the Ghibellines are no longer of political significance in Florence after about the 1270 period, so okay, so what time is it? All right. So Dante is concerned with providing both the empire and the papacy their actual legitimate places on making that the empire is responsible for earthly affairs and the papacy is responsible for spiritual affairs, and neither has any business being involved in the other's realm. Let's see. All right, so I think actually, I think for time reasons, I'll leave it there. I have a lot more I could say. People are certainly are certainly welcome to contact me if for anybody who wants to discuss this further. So that's where I'll leave it at the moment. I can certainly take questions.